Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources, the research, all the complex ideas that sort of define modern life, and we try to break them down into something practical, into clarity.
Today we are tackling something, it's universal. It's a state of being that basically everyone experiences, but very few of us can really diagnose it accurately.
Right.
We're diving into what our sources define as the structural model of modern exhaustion. It's like an operating system we're all running on, but it's probably better known as the burnout loop.
Okay, that term, the structural model, I feel like we need to unpack that right away because when we talk about burnout, the whole conversation, it always defaults to personal choices, right? It's I'm sleeping poorly, I'm working too much, I just need to exercise more.
Right, the shoulds.
Exactly. But the material we've synthesized for this deep dive, it completely rejects that kind of personal blame. It gives us this, it's almost an architectural blueprint of why modern life can feel so overwhelming and at the same time so unmotivated.
And divided.
Yeah.
And restless.
All of it. Simultaneously.
And that's the whole mission here. It's a really crucial distinction to make. Our sources, they're emphatic about this. The burnout loop is not a personal moral failing. It's not a character flaw. It's not some kind of generational weakness.
So what is it?
It's structural. It's an adaptive response to a set of conditions. You've got rapid technological change, massive shifts in the economy, and just this information environment that has changed way faster than our human systems could ever accommodate.
So our goal today for you listening is to give you the language and the framework to move past that self-blame.
Yep.
To stop feeling guilty about resting or, even about scrolling on your phone, and instead to understand the actual machinery of this trap. We're looking for clarity, not just outrage. We want to see how convenience and overstimulation and inertia all work together to keep us stuck.
Exactly. We're trying to formalize the mechanics so you can locate yourself inside the system. Because once you get the architecture, you can stop seeing your own exhaustion as some kind of deficiency that you have to fix all by yourself.
Right. Through sheer willpower.
Yeah. It stops being a personal problem and it becomes a design problem, one that you can actually manage.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning of this loop, the fuel for the whole thing. Stage 1, overstimulation and arousal debt. What's the core concept we need to get here?
The core concept is relentless activation. Our modern environment, it doesn't just, present an occasional challenge. It creates continuous, basically unavoidable cognitive and emotional stimulation.
And we're talking about more than just a full inbox.
Yeah, way more. That's part of it, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's also the ambient stress from work, demands that never really end. It's the pressure of social comparison, but on a global scale now. And maybe the most damaging thing is the algorithmically amplified conflict, that constant moral pressure to be informed and emotionally reactive all the time.
And the key thing here, the sources say, is that this isn't just hard work. Hard work traditionally leads to fatigue, then you rest, then you recover. This feels different.
It is completely different. It's the unresolved nature of the stress. That's the key. This relentless ambient stimulation, it activates our ancient stress responses, fight or flight. But unlike, say, a lion jumping out of the bushes where you deal with it and the threat is gone, modern stress is chronic. It just stacks up. It creates what the sources call unresolved arousal, or my favorite term, arousal debt.
Arousal debt, I really like that framing. It's like a fiscal model. You're not just constantly paying interest on this background tension,
Right.
but because the system never stops generating new stress, you never actually pay down the principal. Your baseline is just permanently elevated.
That is the perfect analogy.
Thanks.
Physiologically, your nervous system is just stuck in this chronic state of tension. It interprets the constant vigilance, the pings, the notifications, the breaking news as real, immediate danger.
So you're always braced for impact.
Always. It's like having a car engine redlining at 5,000 RPM all day, every day. You're not even moving necessarily, but you are burning fuel at a completely unsustainable rate. So the big insight here is that burnout doesn't start with effort. It starts with activation that never gets to settle down.
Yeah.
You're tired because you're always ready, not just because you're always doing.
Okay, so if the core problem is this chronic activation, our bodies are naturally going to seek relief, right? Homeostasis.
Of course.
But because the pressure is constant, the system looks for the easiest relief possible. Which brings us to stage 2, the solve. This idea of convenience-based coping.
Exactly. When that arousal debt gets too high, you instinctively look for the fastest, lowest friction way to cope. And modern tech has gotten incredibly good at providing those.
Yeah.
The solve is designed to give you an instant dopamine hit, an instant distraction.
And the sources break these solves into two big categories, and they're almost opposites.
They really are. The first one is what they call escapist coping. This is all about consumption. Binge watching a series, scrolling through feeds, gaming, stress eating. You're trying to disappear, to numb yourself. The energy is directed inward for absorption.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second type?
The second is instrumental coping. This is the opposite. It's activity directed outward. So compulsive productivity, obsessive cleaning, exercising like a maniac, forcing yourself to be creative, or just working more.
Wait a second.
The goal here is producing, fixing, trying to get a sense of control.
But hold on, if the problem is chronic stress, wouldn't something like exercise or creative work be a good way to cope? I mean, those are things people recommend against burnout.
And that is the absolute crucial pivot point of this whole model. The problem is not the activity itself. Exercise is healthy. Watching a movie to relax is a good thing.
So where's the issue?
The issue is its convenience and availability. When the solution is instant, when an algorithm serves you the perfect 5-minute distraction, when your tools remove every single bit of friction between impulse and action, that temporary relief hardens into a default habit.
I see.
You get a quick hit of relief, sure, a moment of feeling better, but the underlying arousal debt,
Yeah.
it's never actually resolved. You've distracted the debt collector for an hour, but the bill is still there and it's still compounding.
So the takeaway isn't that exercise is bad, but that its convenience can turn it into just another rigid distraction, not a real solution. The lack of friction is actually the problem.
Exactly. That's the pathology.
Oh.
If coping requires real energy, you're less likely to default to it when you're exhausted. But if it's frictionless, it becomes an automatic reflex. And this repeated reliance on convenient fixes, that's what creates stage 3, the inertia split.
Inertia, right. The tendency for things to just keep going on the same path.
Precisely. And because our solves split into consumption on one hand and production on the other, we see two dominant modes of inertia that trap people.
Let's start with passive inertia. What does that actually look like?
Passive inertia is when you default to constant consumption. You spend hours scrolling, absorbing news, maybe doing what feels like passive learning, like watching documentaries or listening to explainers.
And that feels productive, doesn't it? It feels like you're staying informed.
It feels incredibly useful. You're taking in all this complex information, and according to the sources, this gives you a feeling of expertise without ever having to spend the energy to integrate it or synthesize it or actually apply it.
So you feel smart because you can talk about the latest crisis, but you haven't really processed what it means for you or what to do about it. It's knowledge without action.
It's satisfying, but it doesn't build into anything. And then you have the flip side, active inertia. This is the person who is relentlessly, compulsively producing, optimizing. They have the ironclad schedule. They're up at 4 a.m. to crush their goals. Every moment is for self-improvement or output.
And that's the person our culture celebrates, right? That's the hero of hustle culture.
Oh, absolutely. But here's the critical nuance. That active inertia is often just masking profound, deep exhaustion. The activity isn't driven by joy or purpose. It's driven by a desperate need to feel in control, to feel virtuous, to feel like you've earned your rest as a way to manage that initial arousal debt.
It becomes compulsory.
It does. It becomes rigid, and it prevents real restoration just as much as passive consumption does.
I can definitely see myself in that active inertia category. I was so convinced that my 5 a.m. workout was solving my stress.
Right.
But really, I was just feeding the loop. I was applying more pressure to solve a pressure problem.
And that's how it gets you. It completely flips the script on how we see success and failure. The person scrolling for 4 hours and the person optimizing their life for 4 hours could be equally trapped. They're just on opposite ends of the same spectrum. The core problem is the stickiness, the inability to switch off that default mode and actually find rest.
Which leads us right into the social breakdown, stage 4, compounding gaps and moral superiority. This is where the structural pain starts to turn relational.
That's a great way to put it. This gap emerges because productive activity, that instrumental coping it, compounds over time. If you spend 4 years compulsively working or learning a skill, you gain measurable things: status, money, expertise.
But the consumption just plateaus.
Exactly. So a real tangible gap opens up between the producers and the consumers.
And because we're human, we immediately slap a moral judgment on that gap.
Instantly. Productivity becomes a virtue. It's discipline, it's goodness, it's hard work. And rest, or escape, that gets moralized as failure. It's weakness, laziness, a lack of drive. And this moral frame, It just pours gasoline on social division. Coping strategies become fixed identities.
And this is where the sources talk about the expertise illusions.
Yes, this is a powerful cognitive distortion that burnout creates. It operates differently on each side of that gap.
So walk us through that. What's happening to the consumers?
Those in passive inertia, they absorb all these narratives of competence. They get a feeling of expertise just from being near knowledge. They confuse reading the story with having the skill. They become very confident talking about really complex topics based on, simplified summaries.
The knowledge feels real because they saw the documentary, even if they never really wrestled with the ideas.
Right. Meanwhile, the producers, the ones in active inertia, they're accumulating evidence of effort. They feel this powerful sense of moral superiority because they can point to their timesheets, their completed projects. They put in the work.
So they confuse the effort with actual wisdom or mastery.
Exactly. Both sides mistake proximity or evidence of effort for actual depth.
Yeah.
And it leads to this aggressive performative confidence on both sides.
And all of this is happening while our brains are exhausted, which brings up the problem of nuance.
This is so critical. As burnout gets worse, our tolerance for nuance just evaporates. Nuance is cognitively expensive. It takes energy, focus, perspective-taking, all the resources that chronic stress drains away.
So when you're exhausted, simple stories are just easier.
Much easier. Certainty, emotional intensity, tribal alignment, they feel better because they cost less energy than dealing with ambiguity.
So echo chambers aren't just about ideology, they're a symptom of cognitive fatigue. We retreat into these simple narratives because our brains literally don't have the fuel to process complexity anymore.
And the system rewards that. Algorithms push emotional intensity and certainty because it drives engagement, and that just tightens the loop. Overstimulation leads to outrage, which causes burnout, which pushes us to convenient solves, which fuels more outrage. The system isn't just tolerating our distress, it's feeding on it.
Okay, so we have the internal mechanics of the trap. We have to zoom out now because this didn't just start with Instagram. There are huge systemic forces that built this cage over decades. Let's get into part two, how we got here, the historical accelerants.
Right, and the first one is the acceleration of time and attention markets. The real acceleration started with the normalization of continuous news. Our sources point to these big turning points, like the launch of 24-hour cable news back in 1980.
Before that, news had a rhythm, right? The morning paper, the evening broadcast, there were built-in pauses.
Exactly. That structural shift created the constant ambient alert environment we live in now.
At the time, that must have just seemed like a good thing. More access to information, faster. What's the downside?
The immediate positive, faster information had this huge unintentional negative. Constant arousal with no built-in off switch. It introduced what the sources call temporal compression.
Temporal compression.
Yeah. Instead of stress coming in waves with recovery time in between, it just stacks. You lose the social exhale. We're forced into this state of permanent vigilance. Outrage over one crisis just overlaps with the next one, and we never get time for collective sense-making or integration.
And then came the smartphone.
The ultimate accelerant. Rapid smartphone adoption in the 2010s made overstimulation completely portable. The solve, whether it's scrolling or answering a work email, can run anywhere at any time.
That's the end of natural recovery zones. Waiting in line, riding the bus, those used to be mandatory moments of boredom or reflection.
Now they're instantly sold, usually by the very things that are causing the arousal debt in the first place. The loop runs 24/7, even in the bathroom. It cemented that inertia split and made it incredibly hard to break the cycle.
Okay, let's move to the next accelerant. The erosion of buffers and security mindsets. The sources highlight specific historical moments that didn't just add stress, they fundamentally changed our psychological baseline.
Yes, they identify the post-9/11 environment as a really critical moment. That period shifted our baseline psychology towards hypervigilance and risk salience. This sense that a catastrophic threat is always lurking just beneath the surface of normal life.
Fear became this kind of low-grade background hum.
It did. Even for people who were nowhere near the actual trauma. It normalized hypervigilance on a mass scale. And then you layer the economic shocks on top of that. The Great Recession, post-2008, is just a clean accelerant. It shattered the core belief that if you work hard, you'll have a stable life.
So fragility and insecurity became the new normal.
For a whole generation.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of chronic stress your nervous system can't solve through individual action. If you can't trust that your job will be there tomorrow, you can never fully settle. The psychological cost of effort goes way up because the reward is no longer guaranteed.
And at the exact same time, the social safety nets that might have helped were disappearing.
That's the systemic multiplier, the decline of social capital, the thinning out of community institutions, churches, clubs, civic groups, even just knowing your neighbors. All of those things were critical shock absorbers.
And without them, we're much more sensitive to stress.
The research is overwhelming on this now. Social disconnection is a public health crisis. When you lose the local, tangible sense of belonging, your sensitivity to global, abstract stress goes through the roof because you have no local buffers.
Okay, next up is algorithmic and leadership amplification. This is where the emotional part of it all really speeds up.
Right. We already established that online systems reward emotional intensity and outrage. So our distress becomes a kind of currency. The system feeds itself. The more overloaded you are, the more you crave that intense, simple hit of outrage, and the cycle just spirals upward.
And leadership acts like a volume knob on this whole environment. We have to be careful here to analyze this structurally, not politically.
That is the essential frame. Leaders set an emotional tone, not just policy. Our sources offer a careful contrast here. Look at the communication style during Donald Trump's first term. It was intentionally confrontational, norm-breaking. It required this extreme 247 media saturation. And that just increased the background psychological arousal for almost everyone, regardless of politics.
It was an environment of constant narrative shocks. Every day brought something new and emotionally charged to process.
Exactly. Now, conversely, under Joe Biden, the tone structurally shifted towards predictability, lower emotional volatility. Now, huge problems persisted, inflation, global tensions, all that. But the nervous system had fewer daily emotional spikes. The volume knob was turned down.
So it's not about policy success, it's about emotional predictability.
It's just an observation that when emotional chaos is high, the burnout loop tightens because that constant high volume forces people deeper into their coping inertia. The leadership style doesn't cause the burnout, but it modulates the gain on every single stressor we already have.
And this chronic instability makes the next part, the collapse of trust, almost inevitable.
Which brings us to D. The ethical tool paradox and trust collapse. There's this blurry line the sources talk about.
What's that?
It's a deep conflict. If you're a public health official or an educator, someone with genuinely good intentions, you have to use the exact same tools and compete in the same attention economy as scammers and conspiracy theorists. You have to compress complex truths into digestible viral formats.
So a scientist making a TikTok about vaccine efficacy is using the same emotional compression tactics as someone spreading misinformation. And to the tired user, it all starts to look the same.
The methods become identical. The hook, the fast edit, the simplification. And this ambiguity leads to knowledge confusion. When experts disagree and leaders polarize and truth is compressed, people just fall back on identity-based belief, on vibes over evidence.
Because seeking out actual deep knowledge is just too tiring when your brain is already running on fumes.
It's an unsustainable effort. And finally, this all sets the stage for AI. AI is actually brilliant at distilling complexity. It should be a tool to break the loop by making neurons affordable again. But culturally, there's this deep distrust. Using it is seen as cheating.
Which just accelerates the inertia split we talked about earlier.
Precisely. The people who embrace AI as a tool, the climbers, they reduce their cognitive load and they climb faster. They use it to summarize, to organize. But others who are intimidated or suspicious, they retreat. They feel even more left behind. The loop doesn't break, it just polarizes around who is willing to use the new lever to manage the old structural load.
This feels like a really critical moment in the deep dive. We've defined the trap, we've mapped the forces that built it, but if the solutions are so well known, sleep more, set boundaries, why does it all feel so impossible? So let's just sit with that tension. Part 3. Why solutions feel impossible.
Yes. And this is all about validating that lived frustration that so many people feel. The core conflict is that burnout is experienced individually. You feel the shame, the exhaustion personally, but it's produced systemically.
Yeah.
And it's reinforced relationally.
And that mismatch creates this terrible trap where every kind of solution feels like it's missing something.
It creates a trilemma.
Right.
Purely personal solutions, your morning routine, your life hack, they feel insufficient and unfair because they don't change the crushing demand load.
Right.
Purely systemic solutions like, let's fix global capitalism, they feel abstract and completely unreachable. And purely communal solutions, they tend to just collapse under the scale of it all and the political misalignment.
So when people say, my coping mechanism works for me, or I know what I should do, I just can't, or nothing I do changes the system anyway, they're all kind of right at the same time.
All three of those statements can be true at once. And that's the nature of what the source is called constraint stacking. Everyone is just trying to optimize for their own survival and sanity. But when millions of people do that inside this self-feeding system, the collective result is still harm. No single person is being irrational, but the system-level outcome is still bad.
It sounds like the tragedy of planetary coordination.
That's exactly what it is. We evolved to regulate stress in small, synchronized groups where you could see your contribution. Your nervous system is designed to stabilize when it sees cooperation.
But the modern village is billions of strangers and invisible algorithms.
Right. And your nervous system still expects that if it does its part, the group will stabilize. But the group is no longer legible. That mismatch between the scale of our biology and the scale of our systems is just inherently exhausting.
And that mismatch leads to moral exhaustion. The modern world just quietly implies that we have boundless responsibility. We should care about every crisis, be informed about every nuance, respond correctly all the time.
And optimize ourselves against global standards.
Yeah.
When responsibility has no boundary, people cope by shrinking their moral radius. Cynicism and disengagement are self-protective. It's not because people are cruel, it's because care without limits just burns people out.
Okay, let's dig into C. Knowledge as a burden, not relief. We touched on this, but it's so important. Why doesn't knowing the solution, knowing sleep and balance are vital, why doesn't that help?
Because knowledge doesn't convert into action when you don't have the energy or coordination or trust.
Yeah.
If you're already burnt out, acting on that knowledge requires energy you just don't have. So the knowledge itself becomes another burden. It becomes, I know better than this, and I still can't live up to it.
And that gap between what you know and what you can do breeds this profound shame, which just fuels the loop even more.
It turns structural pain into a story about personal failure. And we have to see that burnout isn't caused by one thing. It's this constraint stacking. Economic pressure, social comparison, moral scrutiny, attention capture. They all stack up without release. It's a closed system. You can't fix it with a life hack. We have to honor that this is hard because it is structurally hard. Just seeing that clearly, that's the first step.
All right, we have diagnosed the tension thoroughly. So now let's shift from diagnosis to management. We know we can't just willpower our way out, so the interventions have to be multi-layered, structural, psychological, and cultural. Let's start with A, structural and organizational changes. Attacking the demand load itself.
This is where we look at the big stuff, the interventions that actually change the demand-resource ratio, instead of just asking individuals to be tougher. And the strongest evidence we have right now is for work time reduction.
The 4-day workweek trials? Tell us about the specific outcomes there.
The UK's 2022 pilot was huge. It had 61 companies, and the results were compelling. You saw these massive reductions in clinical burnout symptoms, a 65% drop in sick days, huge improvements in stress, sleep, fatigue, and critically, the business outcomes were stable or even improved. A lot of those companies made the change permanent.
So how does that structurally break the burnout loop?
It creates structural space for biological recovery. It reduces the arousal debt. It completely changes the energy equation. Instead of using your whole weekend just to recover from being exhausted, you get a full day for genuine restoration, for social connection, for high-friction coping, like a complex hobby.
So you're less reliant on those low-friction, convenient solves?
Way less. And another key structural lever is policies around boundaries, the right to disconnect laws in places like France and Spain.
Why are those so important?
Because they put the burden of maintaining boundaries on the organization, not the individual employee who's scared of getting fired. They structurally limit after-hours communication. They target that ambient, always-on vigilance that fuels the arousal debt. Your nervous system gets institutional permission to actually settle down.
And finally, there's a structural shift in how we even define the problem, right? The job demands resources framework.
Yes. This is the direct challenge to the whole resilience training approach to burnout. The JDR framework shows that high job demands combined with low resources are what predict burnout. If you increase demands, you have to increase resources like control, support, feedback, autonomy, just to stay even.
So if a company just focuses on making the employee tougher without adding resources,
it's a form of gaslighting. It's telling the individual you're the problem, fix yourself, when the environment itself is unsustainable. The system is the problem, so you have to add resources to the system.
Okay, let's move to B, psychological and biological levers. This is where individual action can finally start to work once there's structural support.
Right, and we need to move beyond just slogans like sleep more. The pragmatic goal here is restoring your capacity for downregulation. The structural changes create the time and space for that biological recovery to happen naturally. And that recovery, in turn, reduces that frantic reflex to grab for a convenient fix every time stress spikes.
So what about things like mindfulness-based programs? Where do they fit in?
There's good evidence that they can improve stress and mental health. In the context of the loop, they work because they target that internal feedback mechanism. They help you turn that automated response of overstimulation leads to instant solve into overstimulation, pause, regulate, then choose.
It adds a moment of conscious choice.
A moment of agency. But, and this is a huge but, the sources are clear on this.
There's a cautionary note.
Absolutely. Mindfulness is most effective when it's paired with structural change. If you don't have boundary protection or more resources, mindfulness just becomes another self-discipline tool inside a broken system. It becomes a highly optimized form of active inertia, and it just leads to more shame when you can't meditate away your economic anxiety.
So circling back to AI, how do we use it as a tool for sustainability instead of a tool for widening that gap?
You have to use it strictly as scaffolding, not as a replacement for human values or lived context. Use it to reduce the information burden, to summarize things, draft emails, organize data. By reducing your cognitive load, you save your finite energy for the expensive stuff, emotional intelligence, decision-making, deep work. That keeps AI as a sustainability tool, not a superiority shortcut.
And finally, see cultural microstructures, rebuilding the village. Since global coordination is basically impossible, where do we focus?
The strategy has to be building microstructures that restore a human-scale rhythm. We need predictable, tangible anchors to ground us. And this lines up perfectly with public health findings about social connection being a protective factor.
So what does that look like in real life?
It means creating small, repeated, low-friction rituals with shared norms. A weekly meal with friends where phones are away, a hobby night, a consistent time for civic engagement. The shared norms are key. Low cognitive load, zero outrage performance, no moralizing. This isn't grand institution building. It's institution design at a human scale. It directly counters the loneliness and the lack of social buffers.
And when you have that predictable, unburdened social time, your nervous system learns that it's safe to downregulate.
Exactly. And you can see these patterns in different cultures. Japan is the tragic cautionary tale. A culture of extreme active inertia and shame led to Kursi death by overwork. That's the fatal endpoint of active inertia.
And the alternative.
You look at some Scandinavian models. High institutional trust, clear social contracts, culturally normalized rest-restry, all of that buffers burnout through predictability. That predictability itself lowers the ambient vigilance and reduces the arousal debt for everyone.
We can't end this deep dive stuck in cynicism. The burnout loop is real, it's painful, but so is progress. So our final part, part 5, is about reframing the struggle and finding some durable optimism.
Yes, a perspective that honors the difficulty, but actively pushes back on the negativity bias that the system is constantly feeding us.
So where do we start?
We have to anchor ourselves in the objective historical view. For almost all of human history, life was just objectively harsher. Infant mortality was staggeringly high. Famine, disease, violence, they were normal. Survival took up nearly 100% of human energy.
So in that light, the modern world, for all its chaos, is a historical anomaly.
A profound one. We've achieved expanded human rights, mass literacy, huge reductions in poverty, medical advances that were pure science fiction a century ago. We have an unprecedented ability to choose our own lives. And those gains were built through generations of messy, inconsistent human effort.
But the paradox is that our brains evolved to see threats more than safety, the negativity bias.
And that mechanism, which kept us alive when threats were physical, is now constantly overactivated because conflict and bad news are amplified so much more effectively than cooperation and progress.
So the healthy stance isn't everything is fine.
No, we live in a world that is safer and more abundant than most humans ever knew, and it is still profoundly hard to be human. Both of those truths have to coexist. That's the foundation for durable optimism.
Okay, let's talk about the dignity of ordinariness and chosen effort. Burnout culture demands that we all be exceptional. Our impact has to be visible, our identity optimized, and that demand itself is an engine of exhaustion.
Recentering the value of ordinariness is maybe the most radical anti-burnout strategy there is. A good life doesn't have to be extraordinary. Most of the progress in the world was built by ordinary consistency, repeated care, quiet competence.
It reduces that comparison and ego friction that fuels the moral superiority gap.
It lets us stop performing and just start living. And we can fight back against the flattening of pleasure that comes from extreme convenience by intentionally choosing effort.
How so?
When everything is delivered instantly, pleasure and gratitude fade. So, intentionally choosing a reasonable amount of effort restores contrast. Take a hard class, train for a 5K, master a complex recipe. This isn't about hustle, it's calibration. It provides just enough resistance to make the good moments feel vivid again. It makes rest feel earned and comfort feel like relief, not just the default.
And lastly, C, humility, grief, and trust. We have to accept that progress isn't a straight line. It's messy.
That humility is essential. We have to avoid that trap of feeling like progress was all fake whenever there's a backslide. And we also have to let ourselves mourn what we've lost from modernity. The slower rhythms, the built-in meaning. Reframing that nostalgia not as a desire to go back, but as a signal of our unmet needs. For community, for rest, for meaning, that reduces cynicism.
And finally, trust, the most fragile asset of all.
Cynicism is the easiest default. It isolates us. It makes us focus on the worst examples, which are always amplified. Rebuilding trust means refusing to let the worst examples define everyone. Common ground and basic decency are quieter than outrage, but they are so much more abundant. Trust is rebuilt in inches through small, repeated acts of care in our microstructures. Hope grows when effort feels like it's actually accumulating.
We have covered a huge amount of ground here, but the core insight remains. The burnout loop is a structural mismatch. It's a mismatch between the complex worlds we've built and the capacity of our evolved human nervous system. It is structural feedback, not a personal failure.
Burnout is profound proof that our systems have exceeded a sustainable human capacity. And that means a structural adjustment is needed, not just a personal one. The real tragedy of this culture is that we've lost permission to be ordinary, to be slower than the feed, to be content without spectacle.
Burnout is not proof that the future is lost. It is proof that the future still matters enough to completely exhaust us. That capacity for care, even if it's mismanaged right now, is still alive.
We are not designed to carry the whole world in our heads. We're meant to carry our part, consistently, humanly, with enough rest built in to sustain the effort. Breaking the loop takes a gentler kind of courage, the courage to choose presence over performance, to let small, repeated acts of care count as real, accumulative progress.
So here's our final thought for you to contemplate. We know the loop thrives on perfectionism and speed. If you granted yourself permission to be ordinary, imperfect, and slower than the feed today, what single small act of care structural or microstructural would you choose that counts as genuine, accumulative progress? Something quiet, consistent, and restorative. We'll leave you with that.